"Don't touch that," the Apache woman pleaded. But the rancher did, and it enraged the town. The sun rose slowly over the small town nestled in the desert. Its wooden buildings, weathered by the wind and sun, stood in quiet rows, and the streets were mostly empty, except for a few early risers heading to the trading post or the stables. The air smelled faintly of dust and horse hay, and a light wind stirred the sparse shrubs along the edges of the town. In the distance, the red cliffs of the canyon caught the first pink light of morning, casting long shadows across the town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were always noticed. On this particular morning, a woman moved carefully through the town. Her skin was sun-kissed, and her dark hair fell neatly in braids down her back. She walked with a quiet confidence, holding something close to her chest. This was Naichi, an Apache woman from a nearby reservation, and she had come to the town for an important errand. In her hands was a small object wrapped carefully in soft cloth. It was delicate and precious, not just in material but in meaning. It had been passed down through her family for generations, and it held a story that connected her to her ancestors. To her, it was more than an artifact. It was a piece of her heritage, a symbol of her people's traditions, and a reminder of where she came from. Naichi stepped onto the wooden porch of the trading post. She could hear the creaking of the boards beneath her boots, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet morning. Inside, the trading post smelled of leather, coffee, and the faint scent of tobacco. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with goods, spices, canned food, tools, blankets, and trinkets that travelers and locals alike might want to buy or trade. The windows were dusty, letting in beams of light that made the small motes of dust float in the air like tiny stars. Behind the counter, a man was arranging small jars of preserves. He glanced up as Naichi entered, giving her a polite nod. She returned it with a quiet smile and made her way to the counter, placing the wrapped object gently on the wood. "I'm here to sell this," she said softly. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried a weight of seriousness. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. "That's a fine-looking object," he said, lifting the cloth to peek inside. Naichi quickly covered it again, shaking her head. "No, please don't touch it," she said, her eyes locking with his. "It is very old, and it is important to my family. I am only here to trade for goods, not to show it to anyone." The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I understand," he said politely, though his curiosity lingered. Naichi carefully unwrapped the object just enough to examine it herself, confirming that nothing had shifted or fallen. It was a small ceremonial item, carved with intricate patterns, smooth from years of careful handling. She ran her fingers lightly over the designs, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her about each symbol. Just as she was about to continue her trade, another figure entered the store. His boots clicked loudly on the wooden floor, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. This was Tom Whitaker, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the area. He had a wide-brimmed hat, a neatly trimmed mustache, and a look in his eyes that suggested curiosity, perhaps even entitlement. When he saw Naichi and the object in her hands, his interest was immediately piqued. "What's that you've got there?" he asked, stepping closer. His voice was friendly enough, but there was a tone of expectation, as if he assumed she would show it to him. Naichi tightened her grip on the object. "It is not for showing," she replied, calmly but firmly. "It belongs to my family. Please, I ask that you do not touch it." Tom tilted his head, studying her. He was used to people complying with his requests, and he was not accustomed to being refused. But something about the intricate designs and the craftsmanship fascinated him. "I'm just curious," he said. "It doesn't hurt to look, does it?"
"It does," Naiche said.
"It is sacred. Please do not touch it. My family has protected it for many years. It is not for anyone else to handle." Her eyes were steady, her voice strong. She was not used to having to defend her heritage, but she felt a deep responsibility to protect it. For a moment, Tom seemed to consider her words. He looked at the object, then at her, and back again. He could see the seriousness in her eyes, but he also saw the fear beneath it, a fear born from experience, from a world that had not always respected her people. Still, he reached forward. "Just a closer look," he said, lifting the object carefully. Naichi's hand shot out, but she was too late. The object was in his hands. A sharp tension filled the room. The air seemed to thicken as the other patrons, who had been quietly watching, realized what was happening. Naichi's heart pounded. She felt a surge of anger and helplessness. This was not just about an object. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the history and dignity of her people. "Please," she cried, stepping forward. "It is not yours to touch." Tom looked down at her, and for a moment he hesitated. But curiosity and pride were stronger. He turned the object in his hands, examining the delicate carvings, running his fingers over the smooth surfaces. Naichi felt her chest tighten. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her voice was firm. "You have no right," she said. "This is not a toy. This is not something to satisfy your curiosity. It carries the weight of my family, of my ancestors. Please, give it back." Tom's brow furrowed slightly, and he looked around at the few people in the store. Some were whispering quietly to each other. Others were watching with curiosity. He seemed to feel a mix of frustration and amusement, not fully understanding why she was so insistent. But the seriousness in her eyes gave him pause, just enough to make him hesitate. Naichi slowly reached out, keeping her hand steady. "I do not want trouble," she said, her voice quieter now but no less strong. "I only want what is mine. Please, respect that." For a moment there was silence. The only sound was the creaking of the wooden floorboards and the soft wind outside. Naiche and Tom stood there, locked in a quiet battle of willpower. She felt every heartbeat, every muscle tensed, aware that what happened next could change the course of her morning, and perhaps the way the town saw her. Finally, Tom set the object back on the counter, his fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "All right," he said. "I won't touch it." Naichi breathed a small sigh of relief, wrapping the object carefully again. "Thank you," she said. "That is all I ask." Even though the immediate danger had passed, Naichi knew that the encounter had left its mark. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople on her, and she understood that stories like this spread quickly in small towns. What had just happened was not just a personal confrontation. It was a reflection of the challenges her people faced every day, navigating a world that did not always understand or respect them. She paid for the few goods she had intended to trade for, and stepped back outside. The sun was higher now, casting brighter light on the town. Naichi held the wrapped object tightly against her chest. She walked slowly back down the dusty street, each step measured, careful. The wind carried the faint smell of sage and desert flowers, and she felt the warmth of the sun on her skin. As she passed the other buildings, she noticed people watching her, whispering. Some were curious, some were judgmental, and some were quietly supportive. She did not need their approval, but she understood that the encounter would be the talk of the town, and she also knew that despite the tension, she had stood her ground. She had protected her family's treasure, and in doing so she had reminded the town, and perhaps herself, of the importance of respect, boundaries, and the strength of her heritage. By the time she reached the edge of town, Naichi had settled into a quiet determination. She knew that the days ahead might bring more challenges, but she also knew that she could face them. The small object in her hands was more than just a relic. It was a reminder of resilience, of courage, and of the ties that connected her to the generations before her. And as she looked back at the town one last time, she silently vowed to continue honoring those ties no matter what obstacles lay ahead. After leaving the trading post, Naiche walked slowly down the main street, her mind still buzzing from the morning's encounter. Even though she had managed to protect the artifact, she could feel the tension lingering in the air. The townspeople were watching her, some whispering quietly to each other. She was no stranger to the curiosity of outsiders, but this felt different. Something had shifted in the town that day. People were talking not just about her, but about the incident with the rancher Tom Whitaker. Naichi's thoughts drifted to the object in her hands. The carvings on it seemed to glow under the morning sun. intricate patterns that told stories of her people's history. Each symbol carried a meaning, a lesson, a memory of her ancestors. She held it closer, as if feeling the strength of generations passing through her fingertips. For her, this was more than just a family heirloom. It was a living reminder of who she was, and why she could never allow it to be treated lightly. As she reached the edge of town, she noticed a few children playing near the well. They looked up curiously as she passed, their wide eyes following her every move. One little girl, perhaps no older than 8, whispered something to her companion, and both of them giggled softly. Naichi smiled faintly, though her mind was still tense. She understood their curiosity. They had never seen someone from her community carrying such a treasured object. But she also knew that even innocent curiosity could sometimes turn into disrespect if left unchecked. Meanwhile, back at the trading post, Tom Whitaker was not so calm. He had returned to his ranch a few miles outside of town, but he could not shake the image of the small object and the quiet, determined woman who had dared to challenge him. He was used to getting his way, used to having people comply with his wishes without question. This morning had been different. He had held the object in his hands, felt the smooth carvings, and then had to return it because of her insistence. For the first time, he felt a flicker of unease. Tom was not a cruel man, not in the way some might describe others in the town, but he was proud and stubborn. He prided himself on being knowledgeable, experienced, and respected, and yet, when he thought of Naichi, he realized he had been humbled, challenged in a way he had not expected. He paced his office, thinking of what the townspeople might say. He could already hear the whispers. "Did you see what happened with Tom Whitaker and the Apache woman?" Even if the story was only half true, it would spread quickly in a town where news traveled faster than the wind. Back in town, Naichi stopped near a small shaded area by the creek. The water flowed slowly over smooth stones, sparkling in the sunlight. She set the wrapped object down carefully on a flat rock and took a deep breath. The morning air smelled faintly of sage and earth, carrying a sense of calm that helped her think clearly. She had been raised to handle difficult situations with patience, to consider her actions carefully, and to maintain her dignity even when others did not. Today had tested all of those lessons. As she sat by the creek, she noticed a few townspeople approaching. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity, concern, and something else she could not immediately identify. An older woman, Mrs. Statch, Harlan, stepped forward first. She was a kind woman, always ready to offer help, but she also had a sharp sense of justice. "Naichi," she said softly, "I saw what happened at the trading post. That man, he shouldn't have done that. You were right to stand your ground." Naichi nodded, grateful for the support.
"Thank you," she replied. "It is not just about me."
"It is about respect. It is about remembering that some things are more than possessions. They are part of who we are." Mrs. Harlan nodded.
I understand. I hope the others in town see it that way too.
A younger man, a shop assistant named Samuel, joined them. "People are talking," he said nervously. "Some are upset, some are confused. They don't always know how to react when someone stands up like you did." Naichi's expression remained calm. "That is their choice," she said. "All I can do is protect what matters to me and act with honesty. Others will see the truth in time." By noon, the town had begun to feel a subtle shift. Word of the incident spread quickly from the trading post, carried by curious onlookers and whispered conversations. Some townspeople disapproved of Tom Whitaker's actions, seeing them as disrespectful and insensitive. Others were loyal to Tom, feeling that he had been unfairly challenged and that his intentions had been harmless. The division was growing quietly, like a current under the surface of the town, but it was already beginning to affect interactions. In the afternoon, Naiche decided to visit another part of town, hoping to trade for supplies she needed for her journey back home. She walked with measured steps, carrying her object carefully. As she entered the small general store, the shopkeeper, Mr. Benson, greeted her politely. "What brings you back this way, Naiche?" he asked.
I need a few things for my home, she replied.
"Food, tools, and some cloth." Mr. Benson noticed the careful way she carried the wrapped object, and nodded. "I see you still have it with you," he said quietly. "That man at the trading post, you handled that well." Naichi paused, then said simply, "It was necessary. Some things must be protected, not because I am afraid, but because they are important." As she gathered her supplies, she could feel the watchful eyes of other customers. Some looked on with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet judgment. Naichi paid no attention, focused on her task, but she could sense that the town's awareness of her presence had increased. Back at the ranch, Tom Whitaker wrestled with conflicting feelings. On one hand, he was annoyed that his curiosity had been denied. On the other, he could not shake the feeling that Naichi had taught him a lesson he did not expect. He thought about her words, her quiet strength, and her unwavering respect for her family's heritage. For a man who prided himself on being in control, this realization was humbling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm golden light across the town, Naichi returned to her small lodgings near the edge of town. She placed the artifact carefully on a shelf, covering it with the cloth again. Sitting by the window, she looked out at the town, now bathed in the soft glow of dusk. The streets were quieter, but the energy lingered. The echoes of the morning's events still carried in the air. Naichi reflected on the day. It had started simply, with her traveling to the trading post, but it had become something more. She had faced a challenge, defended her heritage, and reminded the people around her of the importance of respect. She knew that the road ahead would not be easier. Small towns could be slow to change, and some people might never understand. But she also knew that standing firm, acting with honesty and dignity was worth it. As night fell, the desert sky revealed a blanket of stars, twinkling brightly in the cool, clear air. Naichi felt a sense of peace. She had faced a difficult morning and had emerged with her dignity intact. She had reminded herself, and perhaps the town, of the value of respect, patience, and courage. Tomorrow might bring new challenges, but she felt ready. Her people's stories, her family's legacy, and her own strength would guide her. Even as she drifted to sleep, she could feel the quiet hum of the town outside, the whispers of the day lingering like a soft echo. Some would speak kindly of her courage, some would gossip, and some might remain indifferent. But she had done what she needed to do, and that was enough. She had protected what mattered most, and she had done it with grace. And so, the town settled into the quiet of night, but the morning's events had left their mark. In the days to come, people would remember the woman who had stood her ground, the rancher who had learned an unexpected lesson, and the small, precious object that symbolized so much more than anyone had realized. For Naichi, the journey was far from over, but she knew that with every step, she carried the strength of generations, the power of courage, and the enduring importance of respect. The next morning, the town seemed quieter than usual, but beneath the calm surface, whispers and speculation were already spreading. The incident at the trading post had become the topic of conversation in almost every home, shop, and stable. By the time the sun had climbed above the horizon, the story had reached nearly every resident. A woman from the Apache community had stood her ground against Tom Whitaker, one of the town's most prominent ranchers, over a small, precious object. Some told the story with admiration, others with disbelief, and a few with subtle judgment. Naichi, unaware of how far the news had traveled, left her modest lodgings and walked toward the market to purchase supplies for her home. The streets were filled with people going about their morning routines, but she noticed more stares than usual. Children paused in their play, shopkeepers leaned slightly out of their doorways to glance her way, and neighbors whispered to one another as she passed. She walked steadily, her steps careful but determined, her hands clasping the wrapped artifact close to her chest. She had faced similar curiosity before, but today it felt different. Today, she felt the weight of the town's attention pressing around her, invisible but undeniable. As she reached the market square, a few familiar faces nodded politely. Mrs. Harlan, the older woman who had quietly supported her the previous day, waved from across the square. Naichi offered a small smile in return, grateful for the gesture. But not everyone was friendly. A couple of men, known for their loyalty to Tom Whitaker, whispered to each other and sneered as she passed. She ignored them, focusing instead on her task. The market was bustling. Stalls overflowed with fresh fruits, vegetables, and herbs, the smell of baking bread mingling with the faint scent of livestock. Naiche moved carefully among the vendors, selecting the items she needed: dried beans, cloth for repairs, and a small bundle of spices. She kept her movements deliberate, mindful of the growing crowd around her. It was clear that many had come not just to buy or sell, but to see the woman who had stood up to Tom Whitaker. As she examined a stack of fresh apples, a young man approached her. His face was earnest, and he carried a basket of vegetables under one arm. "Naiche," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I heard what happened at the trading post. Some of us think it was very brave of you. Not everyone has the courage to stand up like that." Naiche looked at him with calm eyes. "Thank you," she said.
It is not about bravery. It is about respect.
"Some things are more important than pride or curiosity. They are about family, history, and honor." The young man nodded slowly, impressed by her calm and wisdom. "I understand," he said. "I hope others in town begin to see it that way too." Naiche continued her shopping, noticing how the whispers around her were growing louder. By midday, the story had spread to nearly everyone in town. Some townspeople were sympathetic, recognizing the injustice in Tom Whitaker's behavior and admiring Naiche's courage. They discussed the importance of respecting the traditions of the Apache people and debated how to ensure such respect in the future. But others were less understanding. They questioned why a woman from outside the town would challenge a prominent rancher. Some accused her of overreacting, while others implied that she was trying to create trouble. These murmurs carried a sharper edge, hinting at the underlying tensions between the town's longtime residents and the native community nearby. By afternoon, the town square was a hub of quiet activity and murmured conversations. A few townspeople gathered near the well, speaking in hushed tones. "Did you see what happened with Tom Whitaker?" one woman asked. "By that Apache woman. It's not humiliation," another replied. "It's respect. That object belonged to her family. He had no right to touch it." "Still," the first woman countered, "Tom is one of the wealthiest men in the county. People respect him. He shouldn't be challenged like that."
The debate continued, reflecting the town's growing division.
People were forced to choose sides: those who supported Naiche and her demand for respect, and those who defended Tom and his perceived authority. The town, which had once operated in relative harmony, now felt the quiet tension of conflict simmering just beneath the surface. Naiche, unaware of the full extent of the gossip, returned to her lodgings in the late afternoon. She placed the wrapped object carefully on her shelf, brushing her hands over the soft cloth. She knew that its safety was secure for now, but she could sense that her actions had already set off a chain reaction in the town. Some would admire her, some would oppose her, and some would remain silent observers. As evening approached, she stepped outside to get fresh air and watched the sun dip behind the distant cliffs. The sky was painted in warm shades of orange and pink, and the desert air carried the faint scent of wildflowers. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had acted rightly, protecting her family's legacy with dignity and respect. But she also knew that the story was far from over. The town would continue to talk, and the tension between the different sides would grow. At Tom Whitaker's ranch, the mood was markedly different. He sat in his study, staring out the window at the dusty landscape, troubled by the events of the morning. He had returned to his routines, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to Naiche and the small artifact she had protected so fiercely. For the first time, he wondered whether his curiosity and sense of entitlement had blinded him to what truly mattered. Tom was a man who valued order and control, yet the morning's encounter had challenged both. He had always believed that respect was earned through wealth and influence, but Naiche had reminded him that some things were beyond such measures. He found himself thinking not just about the object, but about the woman herself, her calm strength, her unwavering insistence, and her quiet courage. Back in the town, as night settled over the desert, conversations continued in homes and around the fires outside. Some spoke in admiration of Naichi's courage, telling their families about the young woman who had stood up to Tom Whitaker. Others muttered their disapproval, questioning why a visitor would dare to challenge a respected figure in the town. The story had become larger than the people involved, turning into a discussion about values, respect, and the way the community should treat those who were different from themselves. Naichi sat by the window in her room, listening to the faint sounds of the town at night. She could hear the creak of doors closing, the distant bray of a donkey, and the soft rustling of wind through the desert shrubs. She felt a quiet strength settle over her. The whispers and opinions of the town could not change the truth. She had acted rightly, protecting her heritage and standing firm for what she believed in. Even as the night deepened, Naichi remained alert. She knew that the division in the town could lead to further challenges. Some people might try to test her patience or question her actions, and others might speak up in her favor, offering quiet support. But she was ready. She had faced curiosity and skepticism before, and she understood the importance of standing firm with grace and dignity. The days that followed were filled with subtle tension. Some townspeople watched her more closely, unsure how to react. Others approached her quietly, offering kind words and assistance, expressing admiration for her courage. And yet, there were still those who murmured disapproval, uncomfortable with the disruption of their expectations. The town as a whole had shifted, and the incident at the trading post had become a quiet but powerful lesson about respect, courage, and the importance of understanding. Naichi moved through the town with the same quiet confidence as before. She continued to purchase supplies, speak to neighbors, and complete her errands. The artifact remained wrapped and close to her chest, a constant reminder of her family's legacy. She had no desire for conflict, but she also had no intention of allowing her heritage to be disrespected. Each day she demonstrated to the town that respect was not simply a matter of obedience or wealth, but of understanding and integrity. By the end of the week, the town had grown more aware of the division caused by the incident. People who had initially dismissed Naichi's actions as trivial began to recognize their significance. Some approached her quietly, seeking her perspective, while others observed from a distance, reconsidering their assumptions. Even those loyal to Tom Whitaker began to reflect on the lesson he had been taught, that not all authority was earned through wealth or status, and that true respect required listening and understanding. Naichi, for her part, continued to live her days with quiet dignity. She maintained her routines, tended to her needs, and protected the precious artifact that symbolized so much of her heritage. Though the town's attention was still palpable, she remained composed, confident that her actions had already made an impact. The story of the morning at the trading post had grown beyond a single incident. It had become a lesson, a quiet reminder that courage, respect, and integrity could influence even the smallest of towns. As the sun set each evening, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, Naichi reflected on her journey. She understood that the path ahead might still hold challenges, that the town might continue to struggle with division, and that some people might never fully grasp the importance of her actions. But she also knew that she had acted with honor, protecting her heritage and demonstrating the value of respect. That knowledge, quiet but powerful, gave her strength. And so, the town continued to hum with life, a small community forever touched by the courage of one woman who refused to allow her heritage to be ignored. The incident had become more than a story. It had become a lesson in understanding, patience, and dignity. Naichi carried her family's legacy with quiet pride, ready to face whatever challenges might come next, secure in the knowledge that she had stood for what was right. The morning sun had barely risen when the town began to stir. Birds chirped over the rooftops, the wind moved lightly through the desert shrubs, and the streets were filled with the soft sounds of daily life. But today was different. Today, an unusual tension hung in the air. People whispered in small groups, casting occasional glances toward the trading post, where the incident with Naichi and Tom Whitaker had first occurred. Everyone knew that something was about to happen, though no one was quite sure what. Naichi had woken early, as was her custom. She carefully wrapped the precious artifact in its cloth and placed it in a small satchel, ready for the day. Though she had handled the object countless times, today she felt a deeper sense of responsibility. She understood that the town was divided and that she could not ignore the growing tension. It was no longer just about a private interaction. The entire community was watching, and her actions could influence how the townspeople understood respect and fairness. As she walked toward the center of town, she noticed groups of people gathering along the street. Some were curious, eager to witness what might unfold. Others seemed anxious, uncertain about how the confrontation might affect the fragile peace of the town. Children were kept close to their parents, learning early the weight of such serious matters in a small community. Naichi's steps were deliberate and calm. She held her head high, her eyes steady. She did not seek confrontation, but she would not shrink from it. Tom Whitaker had also left his ranch early. He rode into town on his horse, moving quickly through the dusty streets. He felt a mix of pride and unease. On one hand, he believed he had done nothing wrong. On the other, he could not ignore the murmurs and sideways glances from neighbors who had witnessed or heard of the previous confrontation. For the first time in years, he felt the cautious weight of accountability pressing on him. By mid-morning, the town square was nearly full. People had gathered at the well, along shop fronts, and in doorways, all talking quietly but with excitement. They had come to see the confrontation firsthand, though few could predict what would happen. Some had come to defend Naichi, others to support Tom, and many more simply to observe the unfolding drama. Naichi reached the square, placing the satchel with the artifact carefully on a bench. She took a moment to straighten her posture, breathe deeply, and center herself. She knew that her actions and words today would be remembered not just for her family, but for the entire town. She had learned from her elders that courage and patience were not mutually exclusive. To act with dignity often required both. Tom Whitaker arrived shortly afterward, dismounting from his horse with a confident air. His face showed a mixture of irritation and determination. He glanced around at the crowd, some nodding in support, others shaking their heads, unsure of what to expect. He could feel the eyes of the town upon him, and though he tried to appear composed, he felt the unfamiliar tug of unease. Naichi stood near the bench, her hand slightly resting on the satchel. She met Tom's gaze calmly, without fear or anger. The townspeople noticed the contrast between the two. Her quiet strength and his restless energy, the calm certainty of one, and the tension of the other. A silence settled over the square as the realization struck the crowd. They were about to witness an important moment. "Naiche!" Tom called, his voice carrying across the square. "We need to settle this. I meant no disrespect yesterday, but you made it clear that you wanted your way. I think we should speak openly so the town can see what is right." Naichi nodded slowly. "I agree," she said, her voice steady. "What happened yesterday was not about pride or wealth. It was about respect. Respect for my family, for our traditions, and for what is right. That is all I ask of anyone." The townspeople murmured among themselves. Some nodded in approval, others whispered quietly, and a few looked on skeptically. Children clung to their parents, curious about the seriousness in the voices of the adults around them. Tom took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I did not understand the importance of your artifact," he admitted, "and I see now that I overstepped. I apologize for that. But I also need the town to understand my side. I am a respected member of this community, and I act with good intentions. I never meant to harm or insult you." Naichi listened carefully, her expression calm and thoughtful. "Intentions are not always enough," she said. "What matters is action. Words cannot undo what has been done, but respect can guide the future. I do not seek to punish you. I only ask that what is important to my family is honored, and that our traditions are treated with the care they deserve." The crowd shifted. Some people whispered to each other, recognizing the fairness in Naichi's words. Others murmured in support of Tom, appreciating his attempt to speak openly. The tension was high, yet there was a sense of hope, the possibility that understanding and respect could overcome pride and misunderstanding. At that moment, an older man stepped forward. He was one of the town's most respected elders, a man known for his fairness and wisdom. "Tom Whitaker," he said, "you are a valued member of this town. But respect is not given by wealth or status. It is earned through understanding, listening, and acting rightly. Naichi has shown courage and wisdom. She has reminded us all that we must honor those who come from different traditions, and that we must treat them with fairness. The townspeople nodded, many whispering agreement. Tom looked down, considering the elder's words. For the first time, he felt a deep sense of humility. He realized that wealth and influence could not replace the simple yet powerful value of respect. Naichi took a step forward, carefully opening the satchel and revealing the small artifact. She held it gently in her hands, showing the intricate carvings and delicate designs to the crowd without handing it to anyone. "This object represents more than its appearance," she said softly, her voice carrying across the square. "It carries stories, lessons, and memories of my people. To touch it without care is to disregard all of that. I ask that everyone here today understand this lesson, so that it is never forgotten." A hush fell over the crowd. Even those who had previously been skeptical could not deny the beauty of the object or the sincerity in Naichi's words. Children stared wide-eyed, learning about respect and tradition in a way that books could never teach. Adults nodded, reflecting on how easily small actions could have greater consequences than they realized. Tom stepped forward slowly. He extended his hand toward Naichi, not to touch the object, but to offer acknowledgement. "I see now," he said, his voice sincere. "I understand what you have tried to teach us. I am sorry for my actions, and I promise that I will honor your request. The artifact is yours to protect, and it will remain safe from now on." Naichi looked at him calmly. "That is all I ask," she said. She carefully closed the satchel, holding it close to her chest once more. Respect is not about winning or losing. It is about understanding and acting rightly. If we can remember that, the town can grow stronger and fairer for everyone. The townspeople broke into quiet applause. Some clapped softly, others nodded in acknowledgement, and a few whispered blessings for the wisdom Naichi had shared. The moment, while peaceful, carried weight. A turning point in the town's history. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and the importance of standing firm for what is right. Tom stepped back, allowing Naichi to move freely among the townspeople. He could see the change in their faces, the way some had shifted from skepticism to understanding. It was not a dramatic transformation, but a subtle, important one. He felt a sense of relief having faced the challenge and learned from it. Naichi, carrying the artifact carefully, began to move through the crowd, speaking quietly with those who approached her. She answered questions about the carvings, about her family, and about her traditions, all with patience and kindness. The townspeople listened, many gaining a deeper understanding of her culture and the value of respect. By midday, the town square had settled into a calm, reflective atmosphere. People returned to their work, carrying with them the lessons of the morning. Naichi had not only protected her family's artifact, but had also taught the town a lasting lesson about understanding, patience, and integrity. Tom Whitaker, once proud and certain, had learned humility and the importance of listening. As the sun climbed higher, Naichi felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The confrontation, though tense at first, had ended peacefully and with understanding. She had faced the challenge without anger or fear, and in doing so she had strengthened the bonds of respect within the community. That evening, as the desert sky turned shades of orange and pink, Naichi returned to her lodgings. She placed the artifact safely on the shelf, covering it with a soft cloth. She looked out the window at the town, now quiet and peaceful, and reflected on the events of the day. She knew that the story would be remembered, not just for the confrontation itself, but for the lesson it carried. The townspeople, too, would reflect on what they had witnessed. The morning had shown them that courage and respect could change the way people saw one another, and that understanding required both patience and humility. Naichi had reminded them that some things, heritage, tradition, and dignity, could not be ignored, no matter how wealthy or influential a person might be. And so the town settled into the calm of evening, carrying with it the memory of a confrontation that had become more than just a moment of tension. It had become a lesson, a turning point, and a quiet victory for understanding, courage, and respect. Naichi, holding her family's legacy close, knew that the days ahead might bring new challenges. but she also knew that she had faced this one with grace, strength, and unwavering dignity. The days after the confrontation passed with a quiet rhythm, but the town itself felt different. People moved about their routines with a little more awareness, a little more care. Conversations in the market, at the well, and in the general store often circled back to what had happened with Naiche and Tom Whitaker. Some townspeople spoke openly about the lesson in respect and understanding that they had witnessed, while others quietly reconsidered their previous assumptions. Though the events had passed, the story continued to shape the thoughts and behavior of the town. Naichi rose early each morning, tending carefully to her daily tasks. She gathered food, prepared her home, and planned for her journey back to her family's community. The artifact remained safe in its satchel, wrapped in soft cloth, a small but powerful reminder of her heritage. She understood that what she carried was more than a physical object. It carried history, culture, and the stories of generations who had protected it before her. It was a symbol of responsibility, and she held it with care and respect. Even with her responsibilities at home, she noticed changes in the town. A few of the townspeople who had initially been skeptical began to greet her with quiet warmth. Mrs. Ananieli. Harlan, who had been an ally from the beginning, offered smiles and occasional words of encouragement. Samuel, the young assistant from the market, often came by to ask questions about her journey and her traditions, learning about her culture with genuine curiosity and respect. The small acts of kindness reminded Naichi that courage and patience could influence others in meaningful ways. Tom Whitaker, meanwhile, was still reflecting on the events of that morning in the town square. He had returned to his ranch, but his thoughts remained on Naichi and the lesson she had imparted. He found himself considering the meaning of respect and humility in ways he had never done before. For the first time in years, he understood that wealth and position were not enough to earn the trust or admiration of others. True respect required listening, learning, and acting rightly. One afternoon, Naichi decided to visit the market once more to purchase supplies for her upcoming journey. She carried her satchel carefully, aware that the townspeople were watching. Some smiled warmly, others whispered quietly, and a few remained hesitant. As she walked among the stalls, she noticed a small group of people gathered near the trading post talking in hushed tones. Their expressions showed a mixture of curiosity, concern, and cautious admiration. A man stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. "Naishe," he said softly, "I wanted to thank you. Your courage has taught me something I will not forget. I will remember the importance of respecting others, no matter their background or where they come from." Naichi smiled gently, a quiet warmth in her eyes.
"Thank you," she replied. "It is not always easy to act rightly.
But if we are patient, careful, and honest, we can build understanding and respect. That is what truly matters." The man nodded, and the small crowd around him murmured in agreement. For Naiche was a quiet victory, not one of fame or recognition, but one of influence and understanding. The town, though still divided in some ways, was beginning to change in small but meaningful ways. Back at the ranch, Tom Whitaker made a decision. He wanted to show that he had learned from the incident, that he understood the lesson Naiche had imparted. He rode into town one morning and approached her lodgings with a simple gift, a basket of food and supplies meant as a gesture of goodwill and respect. He did not speak loudly or boast of his wealth. Instead, he greeted her calmly and said, "Naichi, I wish to show my respect and gratitude for the lesson you have taught me. Please accept these as a small token of acknowledgement for your courage and wisdom." Naichi accepted the basket carefully, her expression calm but thoughtful.
Thank you, she said. It is a kind gesture.
Respect is not shown through gifts but through actions. I trust that what we learn together will guide both you and the town in the future. Tom nodded, understanding her words fully. He knew that the gift itself was not important. It was the intention, the recognition of her perspective, and the promise to act with understanding that mattered. Over the following weeks, the town slowly began to settle into a new balance. People who had once whispered critically about Naiche now greeted her with quiet respect. Children who had watched the confrontation were learning lessons about courage, patience, and the importance of respecting the traditions and property of others. Even those who had been skeptical began to reflect on the importance of humility and understanding in their daily lives. Naichi continued her preparations for leaving the town. She visited neighbors, purchased food, and gathered her belongings, all while keeping the artifact safe and close to her heart. Each step of her journey was measured and careful, reflecting the thoughtfulness and respect she carried in her actions. Though she was leaving, she knew that the impact of her courage and dignity would remain in the town for years to come. On her final morning in the town, she walked through the streets one last time. The sunlight warmed her face, and the gentle wind carried the faint scent of sage and desert flowers. She noticed familiar faces nodding in quiet acknowledgement, offering words of respect and gratitude. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that her presence had made a difference. The town would continue to grow, learn, and remember the lessons of patience, courage, and respect. As she approached the edge of town, she paused and looked back. The wooden buildings, the market stalls, and the trading post all stood quietly in the morning light. She thought about the people she had met, the lessons she had shared, and the challenges she had faced. Though the journey had been difficult at times, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had acted rightly, defended her heritage, and taught the town a lesson they would not soon forget. Naichi turned her steps toward home, carrying the artifact carefully. Each step was steady, confident, and purposeful. She knew that her family would be waiting, and that the stories of her journey would become part of the legacy she had inherited. The artifact, though small, represented generations of wisdom, courage, and respect. By protecting it and standing firm, she had honored her ancestors and strengthened the connection between past and present. Along the path, she encountered a few townspeople who had come to see her off. Some offered quiet words of thanks, others smiled warmly, and a few simply nodded, acknowledging the strength and integrity she had shown. Naichi accepted their gestures with grace, understanding that her influence would continue to grow quietly through the memory of her actions and the lessons she had shared. Tom Whitaker watched from a distance, seeing Naichi's calm and steady departure. He felt a quiet humility, understanding that he had learned a lesson he would not soon forget. He knew that respect was not earned by wealth, pride, or influence alone. It required listening, understanding, and acting rightly. The incident had changed him, just as it had touched the town. As the sun began to set behind the distant cliffs, Naichi's figure moved steadily along the dusty road, bathed in the warm glow of the evening light. The desert air was cool, carrying the faint scent of flowers and earth. She felt the quiet strength of her ancestors with her, guiding each step and giving her confidence. Though she was leaving the town behind, she knew that the lessons of respect, courage, and dignity would remain, carried in the minds and hearts of those who had witnessed her actions. By nightfall, she reached a small rise overlooking the town. The wooden buildings were faintly illuminated by lanterns, casting gentle shadows across the quiet streets. She paused, taking one last look at the community she had touched. The incident with the artifact had begun as a small confrontation, but it had grown into something much larger. A lesson in understanding, fairness, and courage that would remain in the town's memory for years to come. Naichi took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. She thought of her family, her community, and the generations who had come before her. The artifact in her hands was safe, and she had fulfilled her duty to protect it. More than that, she had taught an entire town a lesson in respect and dignity, showing that courage could be gentle, strong, and unwavering. As she continued along the path, her heart felt light, her mind clear, and her spirit calm. She knew that challenges would continue to arise in life, both for herself and for those around her, but she also knew that she had the strength, the wisdom, and the courage to face them, carrying the lessons of her family and her ancestors with her. The desert night stretched endlessly, filled with stars that twinkled like distant lights. Naichi walked steadily, the artifact secure, her heart full of quiet pride. She had acted rightly, stood firmly, and taught a town a lesson in respect that would endure long after she had left. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead, confident in her own strength and guided by the wisdom of those who had come before her. And so, with the desert stretching endlessly around her, and the cool night air carrying the soft whispers of the wind, Naiche walked forward, carrying with her the courage, dignity, and legacy of her people. The town she had left behind would remember her lesson, and she would continue her journey, proud of what she had achieved and ready for whatever lay ahead.